All right, now this Champions League encounter, Arsenal versus Bayern Munich. What can we say about Arsenal? Can we say that they are the perennial underachievers in this particular modern era? Premier League title, they always manage to bottle it up. If you look at it, last year was the classic case. This time also heading into the Champions League.
Pretty much the same story this year as well in the Premier League.
It is, because now the last few days or the last week has not been great for Arsenal.
Yeah, damaging week.
Damaging week. Now, after having put on such a good show, 2-2 in the first leg at the Allianz Arena, 1-0, 3-2, Bayern Munich have dumped Arsenal out. So, after Arsenal and Manchester City's elimination, no Premier League side in the Champions League semi-finals. Arsenal, what do you think? I mean, Harshit, I am joined by Harshit here. Why do you think Arsenal play to a script each and every year? They seem to dominate the first half, but somewhere down the line, when pressure is there, they just crumble. And you saw in the week heading into the Champions League, they were all over the shop. Because now, after this, even their next encounter against the Wolves seems to be make or break. But this UEFA Champions League loss, first time they had come after more than a decade, if I am not mistaken, at this stage.
If memory serves me right, they're here.
2010, if I am not mistaken.
2008-9, I think it was around that time that they last qualified to the semi-finals of the Champions League. So it's been a barren patch for them since then. Also, during all of this was also a time where just making to the or qualifying for the Champions League was also troublesome for Arsenal. Yes, they've done well over the last few years, but to answer the question that you asked, Siddharth, what is it that has been ailing the club when it comes to Champions League? I think the answer to that is mentality. What you see over and over again with Arsenal, and which is why many people, including me, despite everything that you've seen from Arsenal, there were a lot of bright spots until this point. But the one thing that was always lacking was the mentality, and you knew the moment that they sort of lost ground in the Premier League as well, it would again be what you've seen with Arsenal happen over and over again over the last few seasons. Last season again being the classic example where a setback against Liverpool was followed up by points being lost to West Ham, then losing against Newcastle, then losing against Manchester City. It was almost like them falling off like 9 pins. You expected the same because you give this Manchester City any sort of ground and they will be making the most out of it. They now happen to be 2 points ahead in the league, and this was for Bayern Munich, I thought, far greater importance. They were hungrier on the night. Yes. Then there was home advantage. Remember, this was also Bayern Munich that had a point to prove, a manager that had a point to prove because they had already conceded the league. Arsenal haven't conceded the league yet. For all mathematical purposes, they're still alive. But for Bayern Munich, the game was over. They're not there in the German Cup as well. So they really had to put on a show for the manager and for this bunch as well. Despite them not having two of the regular starters, there was no Serge Gnabry, there was no Kingsley Coman as well. But what you saw from Bayern yesterday was a lot of grit that sort of has gone absent as far as Arsenal are concerned for a few seasons now. Which is why you look at those stats, a cagey affair, that's what they're calling it, especially in the second half. But if you ask me, not a lot of shots. Arsenal were just not allowed to express themselves. They were kept so compact, the formation was just so good from Bayern on the night. They needed that one chance, and which is why both teams weren't really willing to express themselves very clearly. But Bayern were much more clearer in terms of what they were doing yesterday, and Arsenal lacked that finesse. Arsenal lacked that sort of penetration which they would have liked. But credit to Bayern for the way that they had stacked themselves on the night.
I mean, it was a vintage Bayern display. I mean, if you look at what made them the ultimate beasts in the 2020 period, why Bayern Munich stole everybody's imagination was the 2019-20 period, where they were absolutely, or 2020-2021, where they were decimating opponents just for fun.
Arsenal were one of those teams.
Yeah.
Arsenal were one of those teams.
Arsenal, Tottenham and Barcelona, if I'm not mistaken. Those three teams were absolutely blown by the wayside. And if you look at it, ball possession, attack, corners. Bayern have always been a proactive team when you look at it, and they dominated all the things. It was like pressure being built, the wall had to crack sometime. And because of that, Bayern Munich, also boosted by the fact that their 11-year hold on the Bundesliga ended against Bayer Leverkusen.
So which is what I'm saying. They were
Yes,
hungrier.
hungrier.
They were hungrier. They wanted to prove a greater point. So for them to stay alive in this competition, there was much more at stake. There was a greater point to prove, and it reflected in the way that they played. It reflected in the way that they played because after even Kimmich got that goal in the 63rd minute, they were clear. They didn't change things much, because you see many a times the teams get into a shell when they're underconfident. Their confidence has been an issue for this Bayern Munich side for a large part of this season, which is why it defines the way that they've played as far as the domestic league is concerned. But not allowing Arsenal to express themselves. But Arsenal, speaking just a little more about what Arsenal could have done, right? I think it's that one clear-cut chance that they had in the first half where, and that's where Arsenal would see that the last two games, the one against Aston in the Premier League, where again there were tons of chances in the first half. At that time, the culprit was Kai Havertz. He made those beautiful runs, but wasn't able to convert. Perhaps Arsenal can maybe just look back and say, had that Martinelli chance been converted in the first half, maybe the story could have been different, but there were no chances after that.
There is a criticism that Bukayo Saka played very timidly. That one free kick that he took, it summed up the fact that, okay, Arsenal just did not know what to do. So do you think that criticism is there at that point in time of Saka not doing well?
I won't just pin it on Saka, Siddharth. I think this was a big question on Arsenal's mentality or how they approach the game. And again, it doesn't surprise anyone. It doesn't surprise anyone. If there was ever a chance, it had to be this year for Arsenal. But what it tells us is that there's still something missing. It's for AajTak to figure out what is it that this team is missing, because they're coming close every year. They're showing shades of brilliance, but they're not able to deliver in the final third. They're not able to get the ball in the final third, as they say in football. In that final third is when they are struggling as a team. They're doing most things right, but they're just not able to get the finishing touches, and which is why Arsenal now, with the league mathematically still alive, they're not there in the FA Cup. It could again be a year where Arsenal will again probably be looking back and saying, what is it different that happened this year?
Perhaps the only silver lining that I can take out of the Allianz is perhaps this individual right in the center here, Harry Kane, did not score. Because if you look at it, Harry Kane has somewhat been an enigma. He shifted clubs, but then Bayern Munich have not won the Bundesliga this time. Now he's only clinging on to the UEFA Champions League, but they have got a very tough opponent coming up next. So, yet again, when we looked at the post-match, Arteta was, I think, the energy, the soul had totally left him at that time.
Which is what makes it interesting now going forward. How is it that Arsenal respond? Because they will continue to face these mentality questions. Yes, another competition over for them. They're not there in the FA Cup, as I said, alive in the Premier League. But how do they respond now to this fresh setback that's been dealt to them? Again, a week that's been rather harsh on them. Conceding ground in the Premier League, then getting knocked out of the Champions League. Still alive in the Premier League though. How do they respond? How do they allay these criticisms of mentality? Because it matters. It matters. If you were to make a comeback, what is it? Why do they say when you talk about Real Madrid, being the comeback kings, or certain other clubs as well who know how to turn things around? It's a good bunch of players that Arsenal have, but where do you bring in that mentality from? There aren't, those serial winners in this side. They don't come in with that kind of experience that you need at times, the kind of temperament that you need. That's missing, and that's something which is hard to, rather you probably cannot teach those things. It is just probably at times just inherited, or if you're just part of that team or that culture, when there's history. There's no history as far as the Champions League is concerned for Arsenal. So all of those things put together. So let's see for Arsenal going forward how they respond to this.
And it is going to be tough, because summing up, this has been a very devastating week for Arsenal. And looking at it, it will impact their Premier League chances also, because it may look like a repeat of that last season, but double the pain if you look at it, because they had played well in the Champions League quarterfinal, 2-2, but losing 1-0, it's not ideal indeed. So Bayern Munich and Real Madrid, the two winners of the UEFA Champions League,
Lobby locking horns.
Yep, they will be locking horns. Let's see how that pans out. So we are in the business end now of the UEFA Champions League. So in the Premier League as well. Let's see how Arsenal cope up with this loss. But if I know the fans, they will be infuriated. and the disappointment might linger on. So, thank you so much, folks, for joining us for this UEFA Champions League assessment. We'll be back for more such stories. Tap that bell icon so you know when we go live, and don't forget we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. From me and Harshit, it's bye-bye.